Welcome back. You're still watching Business Morning. AFEX Commodities Market Update now. Dashboard for the week of June 1st to 7th. We saw mostly red arrows except for the AFEX Export Index, which recorded an increase of 1.31% from the previous week. For more, we have Michael Martin, now Portfolio Manager, AFEX. Hello, Michael. Great to have you. Good morning.
Hi, Ladi. Good morning. Thank you for having me once again.
Yes, and just before we start, I did buy ginger, though, but could you run us through the trading activities under the week?
Thank you very much, Ladi. So if you look at the table in front of you, the total value of transactions traded on the exchange fell by 77.5%, from around 1.05 billion naira to 235.88 million naira for the week. The total number of contracts traded on the exchange also fell by 78.60%, from 64,468 contracts to about 13,793 contracts for the week. The total number of deals also saw red, falling by 35.85%, from 53 deals to 34 deals. The ACI, which is the AFEX Commodities Index, fell ever so slightly by 1.68%, from around 403.07 points to 397.08 points. And finally, we are seeing some much needed gain with the AFEX Export Index, which went up by 1.31% in the week, from 148.13 to 150.08. With regards to the volume of contracts traded on the exchange, as mentioned earlier, the volume fell significantly, with maize being the major culprit, falling from around 63,736 contracts to around 13,483 contracts for the week under review. The other commodity which fell in the number of contracts traded was cashew, which fell from 725 contracts to 200 contracts. All other commodities traded little to no volume in the week under consideration. And with regards to price, we saw only the top and only gainer for the week was cocoa, which went up by 2.81%, gaining 2,500 naira in the contract value to close the trading week at 91,500 naira per contract. And the losers for the week would be maize, which fell by 3.07%. Losing 609 naira in the contract value to close the trading week at 19,200 naira per contract. And then lastly, for the price, we have soybean, which fell by 0.31%, losing 98 naira in the contract value to close the trading week at 31,518 naira per contract. And last but not least, as we always say, the fair trade exchange traded commodity, which still remains unchanged in the week under consideration. And as we always mention, if you want to know more about the commodities market, you can go to our website, which is www.afexnigeria.com. And if you want to get started trading commodities, you can download our app, which is available on the Google Play Store and iOS.
All right, Michael. You know, when Ladi said he actually bought ginger, I was wondering how much he may have put in that ginger, considering the depreciation in the exchange rate that we have seen in recent weeks. What are the effects of this on the commodities market?
So what we saw in the market, particularly in the exchange rate, in the black market exchange rate, is a bit of an adjustment from where the prices used to be, which is around, I think around 485, I believe, to somewhere around, which is now tending towards 490, to sometimes even 500 in some places. And then what that essentially means for us is that it essentially makes the local commodities that we are exporting, which would be cocoa and ginger, maybe sesame, it would essentially make them cheaper for outside buyers to buy them, which would essentially, I would argue, is responsible for the slight increase that we saw in the price of the mid-crop cocoa, going up by 2.81% over the course of the week. But it is the case that the export market isn't particularly active at the moment. Like I said, like I've said in previous weeks, the ginger, we've been out of the ginger market for a while. The cocoa is only trading the mid-crop, which of course has a lesser bean count, accounting for the discount, and we're not really trading that much volume. But something interesting might be coming up though. There are certain narratives that we are seeing in the media that the export earning for the month of November is falling, or did fall by 98%. If that does happen, and if that is true, we're going to see a significant effect on the exchange rate. And if that should happen, we're going to start seeing significant market activity, not only for even export products on the exchange, but maybe even more so for the grains that we have on the exchange. But ideally, when the exchange rate does change, you would expect to see certain slight effects with the export market, and that's with cocoa and ginger.
All right, Michael, you talk a lot about the spot markets on the exchange. How is that different from the OTC market?
So for some of you that don't know, the OTC is short for over-the-counter, and it essentially means a transaction between two different counterparties. The first of which would probably be a farmer who has cultivated his grain and then harvested and then brought it to the exchange in order to trade. And then also the counterparty would be a processor who is also trying to buy that particular grain, of course, with expectedly a larger volume. And then that transaction is matched on the exchange, and that's what you call over-the-counter type of transaction. A spot transaction is slightly different from an over-the-counter transaction, meaning that the excess volume that is sometimes available on the exchange can then be securitized, which is the spot contracts that we sometimes allude to during the program. They can then be securitized so that average everyday investor, whether or not you're retail or institutional, you can sort of partake in the commodities market, right, without having to take physical inventory of the commodities that you're invested in. So, Ladi, for example, the ginger that you bought on the exchange now, I'm pretty sure there is no ginger store in your house, and you don't have ginger right in your house. But in some ways, because of the spot contracts that are available, you've been able to partake in the commodities market. So that's how spot contracts are sort of different from OTC, over-the-counter transactions.
Okay, let's look at data now. I mean, that has been a consistent issue across all sectors, but now with particular focus on the agricultural sector, especially with the current food security or insecurity issues building up in the country. Now, would you say data is a major issue with regards to the food security issue in the country?
Certainly. So look, the lack of data has contributed to the threat, right, to food security in the country, right? And this more so speaks to policymakers, right? Because what data does for you is that data provides a sense of direction, meaning, purpose, and most importantly, a rationale for every sort of policy that you're making about the agricultural sector and maybe even the commodities ecosystem, by extension, right? If we assume or at least agree that, policy making is hard and it can be like looking for a needle in a haystack, policy making without data is like looking for a needle in a haystack in the dark. It certainly doesn't work. Take Nigeria as an example. The last time that we did a census was in the year 2006. If my math is correct, that's about 15 years ago. I can remember I was in primary school then, worrying about my common entrance exam. It has certainly been a long time. The question then becomes, how do you feed a country, if you're talking about food security, how do you then feed a country whose number you don't know or whose number you can't, you haven't counted or, can't count, right? Most particularly for decision makers in the agricultural sector or maybe in the commodities ecosystem, right? So they want to know data on what production is, what the volume is, what the key farmer concerns are, and what the key infrastructural lags are in the commodities ecosystem. But there is no data that is currently available, to help them make that decision. Even if you look at it from an investment standpoint, right? The capital importation into the agricultural sector is at a meager 2 to 4%, at best case scenario. And what that essentially means is that a lot of the investment decisions that should, or a lot of investment capital that should have flowed into the agricultural sector is not currently flowing because of the lack of data, because investors can't estimate, what their risk and what their returns are because of the lack of data. So yes, I would say that the lack of data has certainly contributed to the food insecurity in the country.
Right, but what are the major, data requirements, for food security improvement in Nigeria?
So when you say food security, there's two things that you're alluding to. First off is the availability of food, right? Because we need food to be available before you can even purchase. And then secondly would be the affordability of food. So when we're talking about the data requirements for food security in the country, there are essentially 4 to 5 different factors that you want to be looking at per time. The first and maybe arguably most important of which would be production, right? So when you're talking about data with regards to production, we want to know at every point in time what the production volume is from one location to the other. We want to know what that volume is as an entire country, right? So we want to know what the distribution pattern for that production is, right? So we want to know what crops are actually being produced and what the production number is, for that particular crop. Secondly, you also want to know what the consumption pattern is, right? So for every single resident of the country, you want to know what their consumption pattern is, how that consumption pattern is distributed, right, over the course of an entire year. What commodities are they buying? How are they buying? When are they buying? And most importantly, why are they buying? Thirdly would be prices, right? And maybe more so open market prices in comparison to exchange prices. And then what you want to know here is how do prices move? When do they move? And why do they move? right? And what factors underscore those price movements, and whether or not you want to support or at least come up with policies to sort of, to sort of help with those factors that are, contributing to price movements. The fourth would be household incomes, right, and household consumption patterns, right? So for every single household that currently that currently exists in the country, you want to know what their consumption pattern is. You want to know when they buy, why they buy, and what they buy, right? And lastly, and maybe not least importantly, would be the farmer, right? So for every single farmer that cultivates and then harvests, what crops do they particularly cultivate? When do they cultivate? How do they cultivate? So all these data points are essentially what I think we would need if we are actually being serious as a country, if we are actually serious about being food secure as a country.
Okay, now AFEX is said to be the largest Nigerian agriculture data bank. So what are the structures being put in place to actually in your data collection?
Thank you very much. So for us at AFEX Commodities Exchange, feeding Africa, right, and achieving the Sustainable Development Goal of no poverty and zero hunger, we believe that they would be impossible without data-driven innovations and solutions, right? And what we have tried to do over the past 4 to 5 years that AFEX has been in existence is to aggregate as much data as we can so that we can then begin to provide data-driven innovations and solutions in the agricultural sector. And most importantly, for investors that are looking to participate in the, in the agricultural sector, and whether that's domestic or foreign, the question then becomes, with the data that we have, we then help them understand, first of all, the dynamics of the agricultural sector, but more so what their risk and return would be for every single dollar or naira, as the case may be, invested in the agricultural sector, right? And you can't do that without having data. So some of the platforms that we use at AFEX Commodities Exchange to aggregate some of this data, first off, would be Workbench, which is an enterprise resource planning solution, which helps us, aggregate farmer data. Aggregate data on farmer land size, their location, what crop that they're producing per time. The second of all would be the COMEX, which helps us aggregate data on investing pattern, right? So what products are they investing in per time? What products are they most interested in, depending on the time of the year and all of that, whether it's fixed income or spot contracts, and a couple of other products that we have on the exchange. Thirdly would be the surveys that we do as an exchange, some of which I'm pretty sure we've already spoken about with regards to the impact report, which certainly helps us measure, the impact of the work that we do in terms of input financing to farmers. And then, we currently are also in the pipeline of doing a crop production survey, which helps us understand, the crops that farmers are cultivating per time and why they're cultivating those crops. And then lastly, and maybe, which is what we do speak to on this program, more often than not, would be price data, which is on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, and even on a quarterly basis, right? So these are some of the data that we've been able to aggregate, and we are currently aggregating in order to provide some sort of framework for investors that want to provide capital into the agricultural sector and help them measure their risk and their return.
All right, but what other future plans do you have, in solving this data issue in the sector?
So for one, we are not relenting as a company in aggregating the data that we've already aggregated. We're looking to expand, like I've alluded to earlier, we're looking to expand, the number of data that we're able to aggregate. But I think more so importantly, to answer your question, we are looking into the possibility of adding AI and machine learning to some of the data that we currently have, so that it's not just important that we aggregate that data, it's more so now important for us to be able to use that data to predict, right, what is going to happen in the future with regards to some of those data points that I've already mentioned, right? So with regards to production, so yes, we know what has happened with, in the last decade, but then can we begin to predict, what is going to happen in the next decade, right, using data, right? And that would speak to production, consumption, prices, and even with farmer and their cultivation, and even the farmer and their cultivation patterns. Because if we believe that we're crazy enough to help Africa feed itself, we also believe that goal would be impossible without having the necessary data.
All right, Michael, always great to have you. We'll have to leave it there now. Thank you so much for your time on the program. Michael Martin is a portfolio manager at AFEX. We'll take a moment now.